Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to a review of the perhaps often slightly overlooked Russian Tier 6 heavy tank, the T-150. Now we're going to have a look at if there's a reason why this machine is overlooked, and the answer is yes, but that might soon change, we shall see. But anyway, just a little bit of historical background. After the Germans in the Second World War invaded Russia in Operation Barbarossa, they eventually got a bit of a rude shock in the shape of the T-34 and the KV-1. So the T-34 was the Russian medium tank that was produced in ridiculous numbers and kept being modified throughout the war to remain competitive, and the KV-1 was a Russian heavy tank. It was kind of really the first of the Russian heavy tanks. And you know, you got a bit of an arms race that led or accelerated the development of tanks like the Tiger and the Panther, which in turn gave the Russians a bit of a shock. And so this sort of arms race continued. And there was a plan to take the KV-1 and up-armour it, and so essentially that's what the T-150 is. The T-150 is an up-armoured version of the KV-1, and in this game it's also a rather up-gunned version. So what do you actually have? 880 hit points is a pretty respectable slab of health, and that puts it up there with tanks like the Churchill 7 and the VK3601H, for having a good slab of health at tier 6. Not as much as those tanks, but it's still a good amount to have. It's a heavy old tank weighing about 55 tons, close as damn it, and a 700 horsepower engine means that this thing is never going to win any speed contests, but it's not painfully slow. Speed limit of 35 and you can reach that, it's not too bad. More noticeable and more painful is the dodgy traverse speed of 18 degrees a second. The turret turns a bit faster, but overall this thing doesn't really like to turn all that much. You can see from the raw numbers that the T-150 is an up-armoured from the KV-1, and as you can see from this tank model, has a new turret. The gun we'll talk about in more detail later, and ditto for the exact armour scheme, but you start getting onto some of the dodgy things about this tank. It suffers from mid-tier Russian tank syndrome, i.e. the signal range is garbage, meaning that it is entirely possible to lose contact with some of your team members and not know what's going on the other side of the map, and it is blind as a bat. 330 meters view range is bad. Just to give you an idea of quite how bad, if I jump to a tier 2, that's got 320, the Cruiser 3. It's a terrible view range to have at tier 6. But, you know, there we go. Them's the breaks. So, what else do you actually get with this tank? Well, as I say, it's an up-armoured version of the KV-1, but I'll discuss the armour in more detail later on, and it's a little bit on the sluggish side. It's a heavy tank, and it definitely is a heavy tank. So let's have a quick look at the gun selection, shall we? And there's an awful lot of guns to choose from. Loads and loads of guns to choose from, which can make grinding this thing potentially a little bit confusing. So I'm going to have a quick talk about the grind, and then we'll talk about the guns in slightly more detail, I think. So let's have a little look at the tech tree. Now, one of the reasons that you don't see this tank very much is that it is on the, if we're going to be honest, the neglected Russian heavy tank line. So, Russians, you play the MS-1, it's at tier 1, you get through that quickly. You then get to the T-26 at tier 2, again, you get through it quite quickly, it's only a tier 2 machine. T-46, we're still on light tanks at the moment. Again, you can get through that fairly speedily, and that leads on to either the T-50, which continues being a light tank, but leads to the T-34, so if you want to play the Russian mediums, you can go that way, or I guess from there you can actually go up to the Russian tank destroyers as well. Or you can come down to the T-28. Now this is a medium tank, but it's a big old machine. The armour's garbage, the gun's good, but most people don't like it. I was not a fan of this machine, and it can be a painful grind. At which point you move on to the KV-1 at tier 5, and this is where the Russian heavy tank thing really starts. Heavily armoured, this is one of the most feared machines at tier 5. Heavily armoured with a decent gun, it's an excellent all-round heavy tank, and I really do recommend it for beginner players. It can teach you a lot about armour which can be very valuable. And from there you branch into three different, at the moment you branch into three different tier 6 heavy tanks. The KV-2 doesn't really lead anywhere in particular. It branches down eventually into the Russian SPG line, but you can just get to the SPG line from tier 2. And it also allows you to unlock the T-150 from it, which is an interesting way of doing things, but I'm not going to talk about that in great detail. You have the KV-1S then, which leads up to the MT-25, and you can use that to go across to the medium tanks, and also it leads to the more popular of the Russian heavy tank lines. You know, you get the KV-1S, the IS, the IS-3, IS-8, and IS-7. And then you get the T-150. Now, this second Russian heavy tank line tends to be the slower and the more heavily armoured of the Russian heavy tanks, and also, as I say, the less popular, because you don't get such machines as the IS-3, which is very strong for its tier and quite easy to play. Ditto for the KV-1S, arguably ditto for the IS. And so I think that's one of the reasons you don't see that many T-150s. Nonetheless, the T-150 is just a natural progression of the playstyle of the KV-1. You angle your armour a lot, you use your armour to bounce shots in a way that you kind of don't with the other tier 6 heavies. And you use the gun to beat people over the face with until they die. So, assuming you have gotten to the T-150... No, just before that, I would actually quickly like to mention. I've said that this is one of the reasons, you know, being on this tank line, it is less popular. This tank line is not as popular a tank line to play. However, as of patch 9.3, the KV-1S is being split into two tanks. The KV-1S is being moved down to tier 5, and the KV-85 is replacing it at tier 6. Now, I'm not going to talk about the merits of those tanks. I have mentioned them before, and because I haven't actually played either of them because they're not out yet, but it does change how you get onto this tank line, this more popular tank line. There will not be a direct line from the KV-1 to the what will be tier 6, the KV-85. You will have to sidestep to the KV-1S, which is also at tier 5, then go to the KV-85 at tier 6. So in order to play this currently more popular tank line, you will either have to play two different tier 5s, because this will be a sidestep, or you can come through the medium lines via the KV-13 and still drop down onto the IS, but then you will have to play two different tier 7s. And so that extra tank, that extra grind, might mean that this tank line loses a little bit of its popularity, especially when combined with the fact that they're changing the KV-1S, and lots of people just spam the KV-1S like it's going out of fashion. So that might make this tank line all the more popular, and so you might, I guess, be slightly more interested in whether the T-150 is any good. So then you get to the T-150, what sort of situation are you in? Well, in terms of engines, you are only going to have... stock configuration, you will have the stock engine. This second engine, which gives you 600 horsepower, which is a nice upgrade from the, I can't remember, stock engine's 500, so 500 goes to 600. If you have already played down the Russian mediums, the A43 or the A44, or you've played the KV-2, then you will already have this engine unlocked, and if you haven't, then you won't, and you'll have to unlock it. And you will have to unlock it because the KV-3 comes off of the engine, so to progress, you need to play to unlock all of the engines, which means you will also need to unlock this engine, which is 700 horsepower. It is an upgrade, but frustratingly, it is only used on the T-150. You don't use it on any other tank. Radio, well, this is used on a whole bunch of different machines, however... including the KV-1, so if you've elited the KV-1, you'll already have this top radio, not that anyone really cares too much about the radios. How about gun selection? Well, there's your stock gun, the 76mm gun. There's the 107mm ZIS-6. Now, if you've already played the KV-2, you will have this top gun potentially unlocked. You can unlock it on the KV-2 for not that much XP. Is it the same amount of XP on the T-150? Oh, interestingly, okay, hang on, I'm just going to switch to the... No, it is the same, yeah, that's fine, sorry. T-150, yes. So this top gun is 14,500 research experience. That, in order to unlock that and mount it, you need the top turret, which is another 4,000, let's call it, research XP. While you're grinding all this, which one of these guns are you going to use? Well, There's the stock gun, but if you can avoid it, you're not going to use the stock gun because the stock gun is garbage. 86mm of penetration, only going up to 102. That's bad on a tier 5. That's not great on a tier 4. It sucks on a tier 6. So that leaves you with these 3 guns. But thankfully, you can already have some of these guns unlocked. So, firstly, the 85mm gun here. This gun is not the gun from the KV-1, frustratingly. You have to unlock it if you want the top turret and the top gun, and trust me, you do want the top turret and the top gun. Do get those, so you have to go through this gun, but you don't already have it unlocked. It's also not that good. 119 penetration, that's actually marginally less than you get on the KV-1. 12.5 round a minute rate of fire is quite good. 160 average damage is okay. Not very accurate, aim time sucks. This is not a very good gun to use on a tier 6 heavy tank, I will be honest, and would not be the gun that I would recommend using. So then you're left with one of these 2 guns to grind with. 57mm gun here. Well, this you will have unlocked. If you've elited the KV-1, you'll already have this gun, which is good. What is not so good is, well, the gun. So, 26.09 rate of fire. This thing is, broadly speaking, a machine gun. I mean, if you've used this gun on the KV-1 or a similar gun on the T-34 or any of those things, you know what to expect from a 57mm gun at about tier 5 or 6. But 112 penetration, that's painful. 85 average damage, that's painful. 0.34 accuracy is good. 2.3 second aim time is not bad, but these do not make up for the bad penetration and bad average damage. So I do not recommend using this gun to grind out the stuff on this tank. The gun I recommend using is this, the 122mm U11 little stubby howitzer. And again, if you've elited the KV-1, you'll already have this gun unlocked. So what do you get? Well, 5.45 rate of rounds per minute, which is okay. It fires either high explosive or heat ammo. HE gives you 61 pen and 450 average damage, which is actually usable at tier 6. If you want to fire some heat, that goes up to 140 pen and goes down to 370 average damage. So actually, if you find yourself in particular in a tier 6 game, sometimes a tier 7 game, you can use the high explosive anti-tank ammunition to whack out an awful lot of damage. And failing that, you can just spam high explosive at everyone. And I've got a couple of videos up where I do that. The accuracy is garbage, you want to use this at point blank range, and the aim time sucks. But I think this is the gun that you want to use to grind out the rest of this tank. So your stock configuration will probably look something like, if you follow my advice, 122mm U11 howitzer, top radio, and that's about it, and the rest you will have to unlock. What order do you want to unlock it in? You want to prioritise getting this top turret and this top gun. No, that does not get you any closer to the KV-13, but trust me, the top gun is much better on this tank. And then you want to prioritise the engines. And then you can go and get the KV-3 and unlock the suspension whenever it is you have to. I can't be bothered to work out exactly when that will be, and then you move on to the KV-3. So, let's just quickly talk about the guns. I've spoken about most of them, but I haven't spoken about the moneymaker. This is the top gun on this tank, and it's actually pretty good. Well, okay. It's all... I recognise that it's pretty good, but I don't like it. Let's draw it at that. So, it's a 107mm gun. 5.88 rounds per minute, which when you consider it does 300 average damage, is actually pretty darn good. That means that you will fire a shot, even with no equipment, assuming you have a 100% crew, you will fire a shot about every 10 and a bit seconds. 10-11 seconds for 300 average damage, which at tier 6 is pretty nice. 167 pen is perfectly fine at tier 6. If you want to fire APCR, that goes up to 219. I carry some on this tank, but I'm not sure if I've ever fired a round. And it's a 107 gun, the HE rounds are pretty good. But this is a Russian heavy tank gun. Your accuracy is garbage, your aim time is garbage. And if you were to compare this with the 122mm gun that the KV-1S gets at the moment, or what will be the KV-85 for instance, you lose some alpha damage and some penetration, but you gain some DPM. You do not get substantially more accurate, however, and this is kind of my bugbear with this gun. It's still not very accurate, it's still a cumbersome thing to use, and it's still a bit of a nuisance. So I am not actually a massive fan of this gun, but make sure you're at close range and you can get some good things out of it. And that's the gun that this tank comes with. So, quickly talk about some crew skills and some equipment. But before I do that, no, we'll talk about that with equipment. So, crew skills. What do you want with crew skills? Well, this was my T-150 crew. Don't pay any attention to their crew skill level. They have since been retrained to the KV-3 because there was a special on when it was cheap and I took advantage of it. Sixth Sense is always a good thing to have, in my opinion, on any tank ever in the game. On your gunner, I would start off with repairs. On your loader, safe stowage, because ammo racks can be a real nuisance. Radio operator, repairs, driver. This thing catches fire all the sodding time, from shots to the side and from shots to your front. Preventative maintenance is a must if you want to keep this. Now, you could argue that initially you just want to put repairs on everybody and then you can retrain the different crew members for different skills. And if you retrain for gold, fine, do that. If, however, you do not retrain for gold and you are like me, you retrain for silver, then you will take an XP hit when you do that. You will lose experience when you retrain your crew skill. And I would argue that the added time it therefore takes you to get hold of, especially these two, Sixth Sense and Preventative Maintenance, to get hold of those perks on this tank, I would argue the extra time is not worth the small increase in repair speed that you will get. Especially because when I'm grinding it, carry a toolbox which buffs my repair speed anyway. So they're my thoughts on the crew skills. How about equipment? Well, as I said, this thing catches fire all the time, so you want a manual fire extinguisher. You just do. Repair kit, pretty much a must, same for first aid kit. So your standard set of consumables. If you're going to keep this thing, I mean, I just used a pauper set of equipment to grind through it, but if you're going to keep it, what would I recommend that you take? Well, large caliber tank gun rammer, increase the DPM, make yourself happier. Then I am probably going to say improved vents, class 3. And then there's a little bit of choice, I guess. Wet ammo rack, I haven't noticed any massive ammo rack problems with this tank. Toolbox is a perfectly valid choice, get the repair speed, make the repair speed better. Heavy spall liner, also a valid choice, you become a prime artillery target. Fill tanks with CO2, well, it's not my tanks getting hit that's been the problem, it's my engine being hit, as far as I can work out, that sets me on fire, so I don't think that's actually going to be all that helpful. Torsion bars, don't bother. Gun laying drive is a very valid option to make the gun aim faster. Cyclone filter, actually you might want to get to increase the engine durability, but I leave that up to you. Coated optics, an extra 10% on garbage is still garbage, I wouldn't bother. Binocular telescopes, you're going to be moving too much, it's not all that helpful I don't think. Camo net, this thing is not going to hide very well, don't bother with a camo net. Right, so I've prattled on long enough about this little thing. Let's jump in, have a quick talk about the armour, and then I'll show you some games. I said this thing was about the armour, so I guess let's just take a look at the armour scheme. Just before I do, I wanted to mention, in case I'd forgotten it previously, that this thing gets, I think it's 20 degrees of gun elevation, and yes, 7 degrees of gun depression. Now that 7 degrees of gun depression is not completely awful. I mean, often when you're driving Russian tanks you expect about 5, certainly with a lot of the mediums, but it's certainly not brilliant. And you'll find that the lack of the extra few degrees of gun depression can be frustrating from time to time. And when you compare it with something like the KV-1 Sport, KV-1S, or as it is at the moment, that gets 8 degrees of gun depression, although I'm not really going to compare those two very much, as I've already said, because the KV-1S is being reworked as of patch 9.3. So without further ado, there's the armour scheme. Let's start with the easy bits. From the rear of the turret is 75mm, and it's a pretty uniform 75mm. Rear of the hull is 75, again, with the odd bit that's much thinner down at 30, and actually the entire engine deck is 30. So let's say, I mean, this is a tier 6 tank, so if you're in a tier 4 tank and you encounter one of these things, try and get behind it, and then don't aim here, aim for this very top strip. To show you what that corresponds to, this very top part of the rear of the tank. So you see just this top section that leads onto the top of the engine deck. Aim for that. It's much thinner and you will penetrate. Side armour, side of the turret is 100, side of the hull is 90. Add some tracks in and that whacks in a bunch of extra spaced armour, which is actually pretty good. And those raw thicknesses are actually the same as you get on the front. Front of the turret is 100, front of the hull is 90, but this is where things start getting slightly more complicated. So let's talk about the hull to start with. Main front plate is 90mm with a little bit of sloping. You can see the sloping there. See, just a little bit of frontal sloping, making it 96-ish, if looked at straight on. There are a couple of weak spots, so this driver's port is 75 with a very thin part that's 60. And this machine gun port is also 75. So if you've got something around 90, 100 pen and you have to shoot this from the front, then rather than trying to blitz through just the front plate, you can try and aim for these two weak spots and have a reasonable chance of going through. Rest of the hull, well, you have a thinner section here that's 75mm thick, but sloped at an impressive angle, giving it an effective thickness of 154, don't bother. That's actually the same thickness as the very bottom part of the lower plate. Just have a look, that very bottom bit of the lower plate there, just there. I would not recommend shooting that because from some angles that's going to be an auto bounce. So if you're shooting down on it, for instance. Having said that, there is a bit of the lower plate you can shoot at, so you'll notice that everything below this line, it's kind of flattish unless you're shooting right at the bottom, and you'll notice also that that's still 90mm thick, the same as the upper front plate, and actually that it's got a little bit of sloping in there, meaning that this is actually thicker than the main section of upper front plate, marginally. So the lower plate on this tank isn't really a weak spot, it's no weaker than the rest of the tank if we're going to be honest. And then the strongest part of armour on the front of the hull is this little strip here, which is 120mm. You don't bother shooting at that. Just don't waste your time. So lower plate is not particularly weak, or no weaker than this plate here, the upper front plate anyway. What about the turret? Well, on paper the turret is 100mm thick, but this comes with caveats. So, 100mm thick, but if you look at the sides of the turret, they're quite well angled. So what you actually look at is something closer to 200 odd millimeters thick at the edges, coming down, still around 200 though, until you reach the sections of armour that are literally just either side of the gun mantlet, and you can see them here and here. These are down at about 120mm thick, and that can be penetrated by pretty much any tier 6 in the game. In fact, I can't think of a single tier 6 tank that doesn't have penetration values capable of punching through there. I guess the 76mm guns on the Shermans might struggle, because they only have about 130 average pen. And I guess the German short 88 might also struggle, but you know, most guns mounted on a tier 6 machine can punch straight through those sections. Also, just below the turret, just at the bottom of the turret, below the gun, again, you're down at about 100mm thick. Failing that, there is the commander's hatch, which is a nice big fat weak spot. It's 75mm thick, and it's not particularly rounded, and it's also quite large. So shooting that is a perfectly viable option. What about the gun mantlet? Well, okay. It's a Russian gun mantlet, so you have sections of armour that are, let's see if I can find it again, 461, not going through that, but by the same token come in a bit, 223, 90. So there is a hole around the gun, but it's not exactly where the gun is itself. Well, no, there is a hole where the gun is itself, but if you shoot the gun, then the gun will come into play and it will just make your life awkward, and you're looking at, you know, 200 odd effective thickness. Just around the gun there is a weak spot, where there is a hole in the turret where they had to put the gun, hence you have a gun mantlet there in the first place. Okay, so essentially if you're trying to kill one of these things from the front, what are your options? Well, one, if you're only able to see the turret, you could shoot to the side of the gun here and here, or just below the gun. They are viable shots, but if you've got the shot, just put one straight into the commander's hatch. It's your easiest way forward. If you can see the hull of the tank, then anywhere in this front plate is not a terrible idea. And ditto, I mean, you can put shots in the lower plate if you want, but it's no weaker than the front plate. But that's if the T-150 is pointing straight at you. If you, as a T-150 driver, have any sense, you will angle this tank, and with your good side armour, you can angle this tank quite heavily. So let's just rotate the turret round. Bring the gun down. Boom, there we go. So, if you're angled at something like this sort of angle, then what you find is that your side armour jumps up to 162. Whack in some tracks and you can definitely get some bounces. Your frontal armour goes up to 110. So you might want to actually reduce that angle. Your side armour goes down to 120, your front up to 130. So angling this at pretty much 45 degrees is about the way you want to go with it. And then you're looking at, you know, struggling to penetrate this thing unless you have 150 plus penetration. The tracks are quite large and they will eat an awful lot of shots, as you're going to see in one of the replays, and side scraping in this tank is definitely a very, very viable option. And I would say it's what you really want to be doing most of the time if you've got something to side scrape off of. So have something to hide the front plate of your tank and just come out at a very sharp angle, and either have an auto bounce angle, or you can angle a little bit more and get impressive armor values, including the tracks, and bounce an awful lot of stuff. So the T-150 is a pretty well armored machine, but there are definitely places you can penetrate if you know what you're doing, even if you have a lower caliber gun, and if the T-150 driver is not cautious enough with how they present their armour to you and how they angle. Worth pointing out, of course, that even when this is heavily angled, higher tier guns, so we're talking 200 odd penetration, this thing is kind of cheese. The armour is good, but it's not good enough to stand up to 200 pen. And how much is 200 pen? Well, we're looking at kind of tier 7 and above in most cases, so things like the long 88mm that you get on the Tiger. In fact, even the German Tier 5 Death Toaster tank destroyer gets about 200 pen. Tier 8 heavy tanks, some Tier 8 mediums, you know, that sort of machine. But the T-150 is a pretty well armoured machine, and it's certainly the best armoured of the Russian Tier 6 heavy tanks. So I guess we'll just show you some of that armour in action in some gameplay. Here is game number 1. It is an encounter game on Lakeville, and more importantly, it's a tier 6 match, i.e. we are top tier, which is the sort of situation in which you would expect a heavily armoured tank, such as the T-150, to do well. To add on to that, the objective here, the base, as it's an encounter game, is stuck in the middle of a town where you're going to get a lot of really close range fights, which is exactly the sort of fight that this tank likes, because the gun is not particularly reliable at range. You really don't want to be spending a huge amount of time aiming, you just want to batter people in the face with it at point blank range, a little bit like the KV-1S but with more armour and better DPM, but less mobility. So, we are, obviously, going to trundle over to the town. There is absolutely no point me going anywhere else in this tank. A push through the valley on the encounter game mode on this map is, in my opinion, not a good idea. Especially not if you're in a heavily armoured tank. Now, pushing through the valley at the best of times is a bad idea because you bottleneck everything that's assaulting through the valley into a relatively small space. And so going through the valley, the advantage is with the defenders, and I'm going to have to restart this replay. Greetings, ladies and gentle... No, let's start that again. Here's game number 1. You can see that this is an encounter game on Lakeville, and we're top tier. Now this is important, because in a top tier match, it's the sort of environment where you would expect a heavily armoured tank, such as the T-150, to do rather well. And the objective for this game is in the town, which is great because it forces the engagement to closer ranges, which is where this tank really excels. You don't really want to be spending all that time aiming with this blasted gun, you just want to batter people in the face with it until they die. So we're going to trundle our way over there. Now I am not pushing through the valley, and I would not, generally speaking, recommend you push through the valley, because the valley is a bottleneck. There's only room for 1, maybe 2 if you're lucky, tanks to squeeze through at any given time. And so, as with any bottleneck, the advantage is very much with anybody defending that region. And so I have absolutely no intention of pushing through there. This is especially true on an encounter map, because it's not even as if the region you have to defend is anywhere near the valley, it's not. Now, you could argue that there is some mileage in trying to get faster tanks to go through the valley to outflank the enemy, but this comes with a couple of problems. Firstly, often by the time you've done so, it's such a long way round that the fight in the town over the cap is pretty much over by the time you would get yourself into a position to be helpful. And this is kind of made even worse by the second point. That whole valley is swampy, marshy ground, which will slow everybody down. So I really don't recommend it. Instead, as I say, I'm going over towards the town, and I'm just going to duke it out with the enemy team for control of the capture circle, i.e. the objective. Now you can see that the enemy team has actually put 5 tanks in the valley, 3 tank destroyers, a medium tank and a heavy. We have, by the look of it, 3 tanks in the valley, so the valley advantage appears to be with the enemy team, and so far we have lost 3 tanks. However, they are lower tiers, so it looks like we've lost a T-28, an M4 Sherman, and possibly a Covenanter. Now I'm finally coming around into a position from where I can be helpful. There's that Churchill. Ooh, there's a Cromwell. Don't bother aiming too much, and finish the Cromwell off. Now, the first shot I take is from that Churchill by the look of it, and because my armour wasn't particularly angled, I take pain to the face. T-28, I spend some time aiming at him, and I'm rewarded with a large amount of his health disappearing. I'm tracked, but I didn't take any actual damage, but you can see that Churchill managed to penetrate me earlier on. There we go, that didn't do anything. And so you can be penetrated by people with half respectable penetration values if you do not angle the armour on this tank, and that shot missed. But at the moment, all they're doing is blowing my tracks off, time and time again. And that T-28 appears to think that he can sit there and really take on a T-150 from the front. Not a good plan, mate, not a good plan. Now, we are currently losing 3 kills to 6. And there's a medium tank coming up behind us, which is suboptimal. There's a Churchill in front of us now in a one-on-one fight. A Churchill isn't really a match for a T-150, but if he knows what he's doing, he can definitely put the hurt in on a T-150, as he is managing to do. Not with all of his shots, and now with greater regularity. And here you can see the better DPM of the T-150 compared to the KV-1S. Much better reload. Yes, okay, only 300 alpha damage, and there aren't many tanks for which you can say at tier 6 they only have 300 alpha damage. Oh, A43 got that kill. But it basically means you have better DPM than the KV-1S and the KV-2. So myself, the A43, and our other T-150 are all in the vicinity of the town, and together we're going to try and, well, hold these guys off. We are losing 5 kills to 8, which is a problem. Shot through the front plate of the VK. The VK's armour is really not particularly good. And he has a little Covenanter friend. Now the Covenanter really doesn't concern me too much. The VK can be a problem, and there's also a heavy tank to our left. So what I want to do is push up and try and take out this VK. Oh, we're trailing by 4 kills, 5 kills. This is not looking good, but we managed to make that back so that we're only 4 down. Covenanter shoots me, but his little pop gun is really going to struggle against my armour. But he at least has the intelligence to not stay there and take a 107mm shell to the face. And you can see that I'm always trying to keep my armour angled to the enemy tanks. and you definitely want to be doing that in the T-150. The problem then sometimes becomes people who know what they're doing and aim at your lower plate, or at your turret cheeks, or your nice big commander's hatch. But generally speaking, you can do fairly well doing that. Now, I managed to put a shot for 300 into the Covenanter, but we are still losing 8 kills to 12, and they do have some respectably powerful tanks remaining. But it's worth pointing out at this venture, as we kill off the Covenanter, it's worth pointing out that of the tanks they have remaining, only one of them is tier 6. The rest are tier 5 or below. And between us, we've managed to pull this back to 2 kills behind, and there's 3 Russian tanks left. Myself, the other T-150 who is on full health, and our A-43. If that KV-1S wants to move round, then I will happily put a shot into him and finish him off. But by the same token, if he wants to duke it out with our T-150, I'm perfectly happy for our T-150 to polish him off. Now there's also an Electo over there, but an Electo is not a significant threat to a T-150. I mean, it's not to... well, it's now dead, it's even less of a threat now. Here's the gun in action. We take a shot at that unupgraded KV-1S, and it just goes straight into his gun mantler and bounces. Hurrah. And with that, there's only 2 of them left, T-150 and Wolverine. Put a shot into that T-150. The A-43 is probably going to finish him off, which will mean I won't get a top gun. Oh no, he's just putting himself into a position where I can't shoot him. And the 3 of us, these 3 remaining Russian tanks, try and get a shot on the Wolverine, but no joy. I'm just going to cap this out then. These 3 remaining Russian tanks have pulled the scores back, and we've got 12 kills between us. 12. Nice bit of Russian power there. I don't get the top gun, but that was a nice example of what the T-150 can do when it's top tier. So have a look at the post-game results for this one, and then we'll move on to game number 2, and as usual, that's going to be a bottom tier game. Here's game number 2, and as advertised, this will of course be a tier 8 game, so we are at the bottom of the pile, and this is the sort of situation where you might expect a tank that kind of relies on its armour to struggle. But we have a fairly punchy gun, especially if you're at close range, so we might be able to still achieve something useful. I'm platooned up with Red Bull, who is a clanmate and also a subscriber. And, you know, we get this matchmaking, we're thinking, oh god, this is going to be painful, but nonetheless, you know, let's see how this pans out. We are here on El Haluf. This is the patch 9.2 El Haluf, of course, where they've completely reworked that sort of top left corner of the map. Red Bull is using the 75mm Waffe gun, that sort of tapered gun. And we, along with a lot of our heavies and medium tanks, are going to go up to this corner to duke it out. Now Red Bull takes a left turn here, and I initially go to follow him, but yeah, I'm slightly worried about the number of people we have going up here, and let's be honest, Red Bull's gun is fairly decent at range. My gun is less so. It really is a bit cruddy at any sort of range. It's the sort of gun that you just want to get up close and shove in people's faces. It's a Russian heavy tank gun. I mean, this should not come as a great surprise to anybody. So, moving around here, now the thing we really have to bear in mind is that, yes, we do actually have a gun that can still hurt these guys, especially if we aim for weak spots. 167 penetration is perfectly sufficient to hurt them, and that goes up to 219 with APCR. Now I've got APCR on this tank, but I don't think I ever fired a shot of it while I was using this machine, if I'm honest. But there we go. And of course this gun hits for 300 average damage, so when I do penetrate them, the enemy tanks, even if they're tier 8s, will actually feel it, which is quite nice. Of course the armour in a tier 8 game is not to get too excited about, although you can still get bounces. And we are moving up here. So as I say, Red Bull is providing fire support because, well, he's got a gun that can actually do that, really unlike mine. And I'm just getting stuck in right into people's faces. So there's an IS-6 and a KV-1S up there. Oh, and a Lerva. Oh, that looked painful. So just going to pre-aim at a spot and see if anyone's brave enough to poke out. Bounce on the KV-1S. You can see that I'm not bothering to take time aiming. My armour is not particularly great in a tier 8 game, so I'm far more concerned with taking my shot and backing the hell off. That guy's moving, so I do take the time to aim, and I get a penetrating shot into the top of his turret for a nice damage roll, 326. And you can see the reload on this gun isn't too bad. So at the time I played this game, I don't think it's a 100% crew. And I'm not using rammer or vents or anything like that to improve the reload. So this is just the reload of the gun that IS-6 tracks me. The reload of the gun with a close to 100% crew. Have a shot at the top of his turret, but don't manage to penetrate. And as I say, I'm trying to keep, as I've said before, I'm trying to keep my tank angled, so that if people shoot me at the front, they kind of have to aim for the front lower plate, and if they shoot me into the side, there's a respectable chance my tracks will eat it. You know, good front armour, good side armour, so use that side armour. And there we go, my tracks eat yet another shot. And I'm starting to gain the impression that maybe this IS-6 doesn't really know what he's doing. I mean, the IS-6 gun is basically the same gun that you get on the IS and the KV-1S. You know, very, very similar gun, that sort of generic, bog-standard Russian 122mm gun. Hello, Mr. Lerva. And I miss. But I bounce a shot from someone, either the Lerva or that Super Pershing. But we're currently losing 5-7, 6-7. I've put in, what, one damaging shot so far? Which is nothing too spectacular, but I'm just trying to keep myself alive. If I can keep myself alive, then I can, you know, keep providing support to my team. So I'm not aiming these shots very well. And Red Bull is screaming for help because the other side of the map has now failed miserably and fallen. And the 5100 claims that IS-6. So, having come over here to help these guys, but not actually necessarily, well, not contributed a lot to the fight in terms of raw damage. I've bounced some shots and kept at least one tier 8 tank occupied for a little while. You know, it's not as if I've been completely useless over there, but I haven't exactly been dealing out vast quantities of damage. Conversely, that's basically, well, that is all of their top tier heavy tanks gone now. So their best armoured tanks are now smoking wrecks. This means that the rest of the tanks we have to face are relatively soft and squishy. And this gun is more than enough to deal with soft and squishy tanks. Now you could say back there, well, maybe I should have switched to APCR ammunition, but to be honest, if the shots that I'd taken had connected, then I should have actually done some more damage than I did. Oh, Red Bull is taking some pain from the T-34-3 there. That thing gets a 122mm gun, even if the tank isn't all that good. It hits hard, and, you know, Red Bull is only a tier 6, it's a relatively soft target. But anyway, if my shots had actually connected properly, then I'd have done more, but as it is, you know, it's one of those things. Oh, Red Bull goes down, but I get a shot into that VK. It's one of those things. I didn't load premium ammunition, I kept with the armour piercing, and so far it appears to be panning out okay-ish. So, see if I can get another shot on that VK, if he's going to pull himself out. He does, and I put him on rather low health. So myself and the Centurion are going back to back. Centurion puts a shot into the T-34, and that T-34 appears to be backing off, and I'm going to see if I can put a shot into his rear, and I haven't actually lost any HP yet, which does make me smile. Hellcat just lost over half of his health. T-25/2. Oh, I missed that shot. I thought he was going to keep moving, but instead he stopped. But I bounced his return shot. And we're losing 9-10. AMX 5100 has currently racked up 5 kills, so well done to him. Make that 6 as he takes down the Hellcat. T-25-2 finally comes around the corner. I finally take some some actual damage, but I put that T-25/2 on rather low health, as the T-34-3 dies. So 4 plays 4. Now I know the VK and the T-25 are on low health. The ELC, well, he only has 400 health to start with. Don't know how much health the IS is on, and we appear to be clawing this back. 5100 swoops in on the VK, and it's just an IS and an ELC AMX remaining. And I see if I can chase down the ELC. Haven't seen the IS up here, I don't know where he is. And you can argue this isn't necessarily a sensible idea. If the... oh, there's the IS. If the ELC spotted me and the IS was in a position to give him covering fire, that might be problematic, but as it is, that's not the case. Aim at the IS, take a shot, just over 300. Centurion puts one into him as well. And the Centurion's probably going to get the shot off before I can. You know, that's fine. Oh, Centurion misses. I don't. And there's the ELC in question. Centurion puts a shot in, and Jagdpanther finishes him off. And in the interim, that AMX 5100 had a bonza game and racked up a Radley Walters medal. So there we go. That was the T-150 in a Tier 8 game. And we actually managed to do a respectable amount of damage. In fact, we did more damage in that game than we did in the Tier 6 game that I just showed you. So we'll have a look at some post-battle results, and then we'll obviously go back to the garage for some concluding remarks. What do I think about this tank overall? It's pretty good, if we're going to be honest. It's got good enough armour to bounce quite a few shots. It's a little bit sluggish, but it's not painfully slow. The gun, while I find it irritating, is not a bad gun, and is the sort of gun that has to be used up close and personal, and if you do that, it's fine. You remain fairly competitive even when you're bottom tier. You're definitely very competitive when you're top tier. It's a good machine, and after the KV-1S rebalance, this thing may well become more popular, and this whole tank line may well become more popular. It's also the natural follow-on from the KV-1. If you enjoyed the playstyle of the KV-1, this is exactly the same shtick. Same playstyle. And the KV-3 at Tier 7 also inherits that playstyle. And as you keep moving up that line, you know, the KV-4 at Tier 8, same playstyle. You know, if you like that, you're going to like it. If you wish your tanks were faster, then don't go up this tank line. If you want a mobile tank, why are you playing a heavy tank? But if you want a mobile Russian heavy tank, go up the other tank line to the IS-3 and IS-8 and 7 and all that jazz. But this is not a bad machine. Will I be keeping it? No. Why will I not be keeping it? Well, one, I don't like the gun. The gun is derpy and in a way that I really don't like. It's like the 122mm guns. I don't like them either. And this is not significantly more accurate or better or anything. I just dislike it. Two, it gets set on fire an awful lot, and that can be very, very frustrating. At 3, I prefer the KV-2. That's derpy as you can get, I know, but that's my preferred Russian Tier 6 heavy, and I would never play this out of preference over the KV-2. I would always play the KV-2. I find it a lot more fun. So that's why I'm not keeping this tank, but your mileage may vary. You may actually want to. And just before I finish, I wanted to say something that I think I've forgotten to mention earlier on. The way I unlocked this tank is not the conventional way of doing it. So I played the KV-1, I unlocked both the KV-2 and the T-150, played the KV-2 because I knew I was going to play it anyway, and then unlocked the T-150 from there, bringing the research cost down to 13,000 experience, whereas if you go straight from the KV-1, it's 24.5. So you save yourself about 11,500 experience, provided you're willing to play the KV-2. But if you have no interest in playing the KV-2, then don't do it like that. The other advantage of doing it that way is that it gave me one of the engines on the T-150 already unlocked, and it gave me the 107mm gun already unlocked, because I unlocked them on the KV-2, which was quite nice. But yes, anyway, how does it compare with the other tier 6 heavy tanks? Well, I'm not going to compare it to the KV-1S because that's being changed. I would say overall this is probably better than the Churchill. It's perhaps slightly better than the VK 3601H, but the VK is a bit more flexible, and I think I would actually rather play the VK compared with this. What other heavy tanks do you get at tier 6? I think it's inferior to the ARL. I think the ARL is a better all-round machine. I think the KV2... Well, for me, the KV2 is more fun, but that's probably a strange, peculiar taste thing on my part. You may well prefer the T-150. It's certainly not a bad machine. Have I missed any out? For the American M6. Well, I didn't like the M6, so I think the T-150 is probably better overall than the... Well, no. They're different. They're very, very different. It's hard to make a comparison between the two. But for me, I think the T-150 is better. But as I say, I didn't like the M6, so there we go. Germans, Americans, British, Chinese don't get one. French, Japanese don't get one. And we're talking about the Russians. So, yeah, it's not a bad machine. It's certainly not painful tank to play. It can be quite good fun. But I'm not keeping mine, as I said. I've already retrained my crew to the KV3, and once this review goes out, I'll sell the T-150. Anyway, but it's not a bad tank at all. You may well have fun in it. So there we go. I hope you guys enjoyed that review, possibly even found it vaguely informative. If you did, please feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel, and I wish you happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.